Good morning. Our reading this morning is from early on in the book of Matthew. It's chapter 2. And if it sounds familiar and you went to basically any church on Christmas Eve, it's because you heard it on Christmas Eve also. So you just say it along with me. I'm sure you have it all internalized at this point. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all of the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem in Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men, or magi, and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then, having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Happy Epiphany Sunday, everybody. Or Theophany Sunday for those who are from our sibling Orthodox tradition. Or Reyes Magos, Three Kings Sunday. Epiphany, which means appearance or manifestation, as Beth said earlier, is in Greek is a day of celebration, and it's also used as an informal marker of the end of the Christmas season. So if anybody like my family still has a tree up, today might be your day. It's our day. Epiphany is celebrated yearly on January 6th, or again, for Orthodox siblings, January 19th. And we get to recognize it on this first Sunday afterwards. So, happy Epiphany, everyone. The story that we have heard this morning is familiar in our cultural context. There is a lot of versions and expansions of this story, and we hear it often at Christmas Eve, both here and many churches. The Magi are such rich and interesting characters that they tend to add another layer of symbolism to the Nativity story. They complement the angels and the shepherds, the stable animals and that newly birthed baby and his parents. But we do take a bit of liturgical license with this. To place the Magi on Christmas Eve condenses what was likely a years-long story. The Magi did not arrive on or probably even near the day of Jesus' birth, but rather up to 2 years later. Whoever wrote the book of Matthew is the only one of the gospel writers to include this story. Now, the book of Mark says absolutely nothing about Jesus' birth whatsoever. The book of Luke, that's where we get our stories about the shepherd and the angels and the birth in the manger. And then Matthew doesn't have any of those stories, but does include this one. The book of Matthew begins with a listing of the ancestors of Joseph, the ancestors of Joseph, to connect him to King David. And then there's a short story about Joseph learning from an angel that Mary was pregnant, and Duane preached on that in Advent. And then there's this story. And then immediately after this, we hear about how King Herod, angered by the Magi not obeying him, ordered the death of all boys in the kingdom 2 years old or younger. So, it is much more likely that these Magi encountered a toddler than a baby. We have also, over the centuries, taken quite a bit of license with these interesting Magi characters as well. We have decided how many there are. We have given them different titles. We have given them names and homelands. In absence of a backstory, we have really filled it in for them. We have given them the names of Caspar or Gaspar, Melchior and Balthazar, or some version of those names. And we have often located them in different places, coming from East Africa and Persia and India. But none of that is from the Bible as we've received it. All we know from this one and only description is that men, probably men, the Greek word could imply men and women, but probably men arrived from the east bearing gifts. The Greek word for these people is magos, which is where we get the word magi from, and they were not kings. Sorry, Three Kings Day. And they have no names, and they have no identified homeland. And there could have been many, but we often say three because there are three identified gifts. And scholars think that the term magi may have some clues to their identity, but of course it's not conclusive. Magi, or magus, or magus, was also the term for the Persian priestly caste of Zoroastrianism. I know you already know all this, so just come with me. And Persia was to the east of Jerusalem, and astrology and star watching was an important part of these priests' roles in that empire. So maybe? If there is any historicity to this story, much of the details have been lost in the millennia. But as we all know, our job today is not to take this story literally, but rather to encounter it as it is, to learn some of its context, see what questions call out to us, and try to make some meaning out of it. So we return to what this story tells us. Some number of magi, astrologers, star watchers, wise people, arrived in Jerusalem from the east within a few years of Jesus being born. They carried with them gifts fit for a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They found a person with the title king in King Herod and quickly distrusted him. And then they found a child in a village. And then they knelt down and offered royal gifts. They knelt down before a toddler. When is the last time that you knelt down in front of someone or something in an intentional action? Have you ever done that before? Have you ever knelt down as an act of humility, reverence, or honor? Or as an act of lament, or grief, or resistance? For whom or what have you knelt down? In May of 2021, I knelt down in Plymouth's parking lot, right out here, for 9 minutes and 29 seconds at our vigil on the first anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. I did it out of an impulse, and a few minutes in, I wondered whether I should have. For something that our bodies are designed to do, we are designed to kneel. It was not easy to kneel for that long. It was an act of commitment to stay down on knees that quickly reminded me of their age and of a surface that's not meant for that kind of pressure. Over 15 years ago, I knelt to ask my love if she would join me in a lifetime commitment. And I knelt in this sanctuary in a moment of laying of hands in my ordination. That might be it. So for what or why have you ever knelt down as an intentional posture? Where and for whom have you given that sign of respect and honor? Now, to be really clear, I am not talking about forced or compelled kneeling. Somebody after the first service came up to me and said, I was forced to kneel growing up Catholic all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. This is kneeling as a chosen act of visible reverence and honor, an act of chosen love, a gift that is given willingly and fully. You probably haven't done it much, if ever. Kneeling is not commonplace in our culture anymore, but the understanding of it is an important symbolic gesture that we still hold. I mean, it feels old-timey and anachronistic, of another time and place. There's even currently an idiomatic trope of "I kneel for no man" that can be found in many different settings and situations on flags. Yet the symbolism of kneeling is still a contemporary living conversation that can and has and will invoke strong emotions. Kneeling, like bowing, is an act of symbolic submission and honor. To kneel in front of someone or something is to place your body, especially your vulnerable head and neck, below them, and therefore in a hard-to-defend position. Our Muslim siblings kneel down in symbolic submission and prayer to Allah 5 times a day. Many Christian traditions, like the person in their Catholic upbringing, have kneeling as part of their ritualized movement. Sit, stand, kneel. There are cultural expectations even today to kneel before monarchs, if you encounter them. And kneeling while begging is a familiar scene, especially in comedies. And San Francisco quarterback Colin Kaepernick had his entire career taken away from him after he began kneeling during the national anthem before NFL football games. Psychology professor Dacher Keltner describes kneeling this way. Kneeling probably derives from a core principle in mammalian nonverbal behavior. Make the body smaller and look up to show respect, esteem, and deference. This is seen also, for example, in dogs and chimps, who reduce their height to show submissiveness. Kneeling can also be a position of mourning and sadness. It makes one who kneels more vulnerable, and in some situations, kneeling can be seen as a request for protection, which Professor Keltner says is completely appropriate in Kaepernick's case given the motive for his protest. So what would you kneel down for? For whom would you place your tired, achy knees on the hard ground in an act of honor, deference, and respect? Would you kneel for a toddler you'd never met before? Would you ever allow yourself to be that vulnerable? Would you take the risk of choosing to look ridiculous in our current culture and do this for someone or something. Would you kneel in reverence before a child? And if not a person or a thing, would you kneel for an idea or a concept? Is there something in principle that would bring you to your knees? Kneeling is not easy. It is vulnerable and exposing. One doesn't typically casually kneel down. It is done with conviction and hope and a deep, profound love. For whom or what would you show that deep and profound love? Or not kneeling, are there other ways that you can show the same honoring reverence? Other postures that communicate this same feeling? What inspires you with awe and hope? What do you love so much that it brings you to your knees? Where do you encounter God? Where do you encounter God? Where is God incarnate for you? Where do you find the manifestation, the revealing, the epiphany of God in our world? Where has a star stopped and shown you something unexpected, something unassumed, something that you would kneel for? We don't know much about these magi we celebrate today, but we do know that they knelt down in front of a child Jesus. They knelt down in front of a kid in a village because there was something special, something important, something miraculous before them. They knelt down before a child because that was the incarnation of God that they were led to by a star. They knelt down because they loved, and because they were open to the expression of that love, a love that was vulnerable and present. What makes you kneel? What would make us all kneel down together? Amen.